Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring neurology and identity. I'm a huge fan of Oliver Sacks, so we're going to be looking at selections from his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Get ready to hear some really strange things about how our brains can shape who we are.
Yeah, what's really cool about Sachs' work is the way he brings together this rigorous scientific observation with this deep empathy that he has for his patients. He helps us look beyond just the diagnosis and appreciate just how incredibly adaptable the human brain is.
He does, he really does. So, ready to meet some of these remarkable people and uncover some mysteries of the brain.
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Perfect. Let's start with the case that gave the book its title, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. This is Dr. P, a gifted musician and teacher, and he developed visual agnosia.
Visual agnosia. Fascinating condition. Basically, a person can see totally fine, but they just can't recognize objects visually.
Yeah.
It's like imagine seeing a rose. You know your eyes are working fine, but you just can't identify it as a rose. That was Dr. P's reality.
That's such a strange concept. Like, how can you see something but just not know what it is? In the book, Sachs describes this really wild anecdote where Dr. P is getting ready to leave his office and he reaches out to grab his hat, but it turns out he was actually reaching for his wife's head.
That's right. His brain just wasn't processing the visual information correctly. It's like his brain saw all the pieces but just couldn't put the puzzle together.
That's got to be incredibly disorienting. How did he even manage to just, walk around in the world if he couldn't recognize anything?
Well, Dr. P, he had this amazing ability to use music to make up for his vision problems. He would take everyday actions and turn them into these little songs. It was almost like he was creating a musical map of his world.
So music was like his way of making sense of everything.
Exactly. He seemed to experience the world through sound and rhythm. His case really makes you think, how does our brain build our reality? If someone can see perfectly but not recognize things, what does that say about the relationship between what we see and how we understand it?
It really challenges everything we think we know about how our senses work together to create that, whole experience of the world.
Absolutely. And, there's something else that's really interesting about Dr. P. As his visual agnosia got worse, his style of painting, it actually shifted. It went from realism to abstract.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So, maybe losing the ability to see those really specific concrete details actually gave him a different kind of artistic vision.
Possibly. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Dr. P's case really forces us to rethink that traditional idea that if your brain's damaged, you're not going to be as good at thinking abstractly. The brain is much more complicated and adaptable than we often give it credit for.
It's really incredible how the brain just finds these creative ways to deal with challenges. Now, the next case is Jimmy G, the Lost Mariner, and this one's all about memory. Jimmy had Korsakoff syndrome, and it seriously affected his ability to make new memories.
Korsakoff syndrome. Often it comes from chronic alcohol abuse. It basically traps a person in a never-ending present. Imagine waking up every day feeling like you just woke up from a dream. You can't remember what you did or who you saw the day before. That's what it's like for someone with Korsakoff's.
That sounds so isolating.
It is. It really is. Jimmy G's memories just stopped abruptly in 1945. He just couldn't grasp the idea of time passing. There's this really powerful part in the book where Sachs shows him a picture of Earth from space. And Jimmy's reaction is just total bewilderment. He could not believe that that picture was real because it was so far outside his time-locked understanding of the world.
That's just heartbreaking. So he was just completely lost in time.
Well, here's the thing. While he was totally lost in what we might call spatial time, he was actually surprisingly organized in intentional time.
What do you mean?
He found peace and purpose in things like gardening, art, music, even going to religious services. These activities gave his life structure and meaning. Even though his existence was so fragmented, he couldn't remember doing them from one moment to the next, but in the act of doing them, he found a sense of connection and purpose.
That's really fascinating. So even with this really profound memory loss, he could still find joy and meaning in the present moment.
Exactly. It really challenges what we think makes a life fulfilling, right? Even without a clear narrative of his past, Jimmy G found a way to experience deep connection and purpose.
His story is a powerful reminder that you can find meaning even when you're facing huge challenges. Okay, get ready. This next case is going to blow your mind. Christina, the disembodied lady. This is a story about losing proprioception. Proprioception is the sense of your body's position in space.
So imagine you wake up one morning and you just can't feel your own body anymore. You can see your arms and legs, but they don't feel like they're part of you. It's like suddenly your brain's been cut off from its own physical being. That's what happened to Christina.
I can't even imagine. That must have been so terrifying.
It was really disorienting and scary for her. Proprioception is so basic to our sense of self. Losing it can feel like losing a part of who you are.
So how does she deal with such a big change?
Well, she had to learn to rely completely on her vision to compensate. She basically had to relearn how to walk, how to eat, how to do even the simplest things by watching herself constantly. Every single action, things we normally just do without thinking, she had to consciously plan and execute. It was just an incredible adaptation, mentally and physically.
It's amazing how the brain can adapt, but it makes you realize how much we just take for granted. Feeling our bodies in space is something we never even think about.
So true. Christina's case just highlights how connected our senses are and how much we depend on proprioception to just move through the world.
It's a story of resilience, but it makes you think, about what it means to be embodied. If you can lose the sense of your own body, what does that say about the relationship between our physical selves and our conscious experience?
That's a deep question, and it's one that Sachs explores throughout his work.
We've talked about vision, we've talked about memory, now our sense of our own bodies. What else does Sachs have for us?
Let's go into the strange world of phantoms. Phantom limbs, where people feel very real sensations from limbs that are missing like they're still there.
Now, that is something I've always found interesting. Are these phantoms just memories, or are they more than that?
Definitely more than just memories. Phantoms, they can be very dynamic. They can be accompanied by pain, itching, even a sense of movement. It's like the brain is holding on to the image of a missing limb, even though there's no physical input coming from it anymore.
Wow, that's crazy. So the brain's creating these sensations even though the physical limb is gone.
Exactly. It's like the brain's map of the body is so ingrained that it can persist even when a part of the body is no longer there.
I've always wondered, can people with phantom limbs feel phantom clothes too?
That's interesting. It does make you think, these phantom sensations. They're not just about the limb. They're about the whole experience of having that limb, all the sensations that went with it.
That makes sense. Sachs tells the story of a man with a phantom leg who completely hated it. He'd try to throw it out of bed, convinced it was something foreign. Just shows how real those phantom sensations can feel.
It really does. His case just shows the power of the brain, its ability to create and maintain these vivid bodily experiences. Phantom limbs, they teach us about the brain's amazing plasticity, how it adapts to change.
I'm seeing a theme here. The brain isn't just this static organ. It's constantly adapting, rewiring, finding new ways to understand the world, even with huge challenges.
You got it. Sachs' work really makes us rethink what we think we know about the brain and what it can do.
All right, so we've explored vision, memory, our sense of our bodies, even phantom limbs. What's next on this wild ride through the mind?
Let's go into the realm of memory. Explore a phenomenon called reminiscence. These are memories that are triggered by something specific, sudden, vivid, often very emotional memories. Imagine a scent transporting you back to a moment from your childhood, all the feelings and sensations coming back. That's reminiscence.
So it's like these memories are hidden in our brains, waiting for the right cue to unlock them. That's a fascinating idea, because it suggests that maybe memory is more complicated and interconnected than we realize.
Exactly. Sachs talks about these two cases that really make you question the way we think about memory. We've got Mrs. O.M., a woman who had temporal lobe seizures that would trigger these musical hallucinations.
I've heard of musical hallucinations. What exactly are temporal lobe seizures?
Well, the temporal lobes of the brain, they're involved in processing memories and sounds. So when someone has a temporal lobe seizure, it can cause a bunch of different symptoms, including auditory hallucinations. In Mrs. O.M.'s case, whenever she had a seizure, the same song, Easter Parade, would just come flooding back to her full force.
Wow, so her seizures were actually triggering these very specific musical memories.
Exactly. And then there's Mrs. O.C., whose seizures would bring up these really elaborate scenes from her childhood. These weren't just vague memories. They were very detailed and specific. So much so that she felt like she was actually reliving them. The crazy part is she had no memory of these experiences outside of her seizures.
So it's like her seizures were unlocking hidden memories that she couldn't normally access.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if maybe our brains store experiences more completely than we thought. Not just these little bits of information. It's like these experiences are encoded in networks of neurons that can be reactivated under the right conditions, like during a seizure.
Mind-blowing. So even memories that we think are lost They might still be there, just not accessible through our normal conscious way of remembering.
That's one of the cool possibilities Sachs' work brings up. And you think back to Dr. Welder Penfield, who did those experiments where he stimulated different parts of the brain during surgery. We see more evidence for this. He found that stimulating certain brain areas could trigger very specific, vivid memories, suggesting there's a real physical basis for this reminiscence phenomenon.
So there's like this whole library of experiences stored in our brains, just waiting for the right key to unlock them. That's an incredible concept.
It really is. And it shows just how much we still don't know about the human brain, how memory works, how experiences are stored, and how we can bring them back.
I'm starting to think of the brain less like a machine and more like a vast, mysterious landscape just waiting to be explored.
I like that. That's a great analogy. Sachs' work encourages us to look at the brain with wonder and curiosity, recognizing that it's this constantly evolving, adapting organ. And it's that adaptability that lets us overcome challenges, find new ways to be in the world, and even experience profound moments of connection and meaning, even when we're dealing with these neurological conditions that might seem impossible to overcome.
Well, you've definitely got me curious. What other amazing stories about the brain does Sachs have to tell us?
Well, let's explore what Sachs calls the world of the simple. We'll meet people with intellectual disabilities who often experience the world with a unique intensity and concreteness that we can learn a lot from.
I'm ready to keep exploring. Lead the way. The World of the Simple. It's a really intriguing title, and I'm curious to hear how Sachs approaches this. It's easy to think of intellectual disabilities as just deficits, but I feel like Sachs probably has a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Sachs, he kind of challenges that old school neurological view, that concreteness that it's somehow like a step backwards or subhuman. He makes the case that people with intellectual disabilities, they often experience the world in this really intense and direct way that we can learn something from.
That makes sense. It's about recognizing that there are so many different ways of experiencing the world, different
Right.
ways of thinking and feeling.
Exactly. He talks about Rebecca, this young woman with an intellectual disability who was so close to her grandmother, really loved her.
Oh, I can already tell this is going to be a moving story.
Yeah. And so when her grandmother passed away, Rebecca, she experienced this really profound grief. It showed this depth of emotion, this understanding that a lot of people wouldn't expect from someone with her diagnosis.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that being able to love and experience loss and that spiritual connection, it's not limited by intellectual ability.
Absolutely. Her grief was real, it was raw, it was hers. And she found comfort and a way to express it through religious rituals and prayers. Really highlights how important those things can be, that meaningful engagement, that spiritual connection, no matter your intellectual ability.
It sounds like those rituals gave her structure and comfort during a really tough time. Do you think it was the ritual itself, or was it more the community and the feeling of connection that brought her comfort?
That's a great question. It was probably both. The rituals themselves gave her a framework for her grief, a way to process her emotions. But the community aspect, that's huge. Feeling supported, feeling understood by others, it's crucial for healing, and that's true for everybody, regardless of intellectual ability.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rebecca's story shows us that depth of emotion and the capacity for that spiritual connection that exists in this world of the simple, as Sachs calls it. What other insights does he give us?
Well, he also talks about these twin brothers who are autistic,
Mm.
and they have this amazing ability to perceive numbers.
Yeah.
They see them as shapes and colors and textures. They experience numbers in a way that's almost impossible for us to imagine.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like they have synesthesia, but with numbers. Really challenges our assumptions about what's normal when it comes to cognition and highlights just how diverse human experience can be.
Exactly. For them, numbers aren't just these abstract symbols. They're these tangible, multisensory experiences.
Their story really shows us that the brain isn't this one-size-fits-all organ. It's capable of incredible variation and adaptation, which leads to these unique ways of perceiving and interacting with the world. And like you said, it's a reminder that we shouldn't try to impose our own limited understanding of intelligence or cognition onto others. We can learn so much from people who experience the world differently than we do.
Totally agree. Sachs, he's such a master at shining a light on those diverse ways of experiencing the world. He helps us see the humanity in everyone, no matter their neurological condition.
So we've been on this journey through these incredible landscapes of neurological conditions, from visual agnosia to memory disorders to the world of the simple. What does it all mean? What are the big takeaways from this deep dive into Dr. Sachs' work?
I think one of the most important things to take away is the brain. It's not just some machine. It's the organ of the self. It shapes who we are, our perceptions, our experiences, even our very sense of being in the world. When the brain is altered, so is the self.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point. We often think of the brain as this separate thing, but it's so intertwined with who we are. It's like this intricate dance between the physical and the mental, the neurological and the personal. And by understanding the brain, we can learn so much more about the human condition.
Right. Another key takeaway, I think, is how important empathy and human connection are in medicine. Dr. Sachs, he didn't just treat his patients' symptoms. He listened to their stories. He saw them as people, not just a bunch of symptoms.
That really comes through in his writing. You can feel the connection he had with his patients. He wasn't just observing them clinically, he was genuinely interested in their lives, their experiences.
You said it perfectly. He saw the power of stories, of understanding the person behind the diagnosis. And through that compassionate approach, he helped us see the humanity in even the most unusual neurological conditions.
I think that's one of the things that makes Sachs' work so captivating. He wasn't afraid to get close to his patients, to really delve into their inner worlds. And by doing that, he showed us the incredible resilience and adaptability of the human spirit.
Absolutely. And finally, I think Sachs' work challenges us to be open to the unexpected, to question what we think we know about the brain and what it's capable of. He shows us that even when people are facing these neurological challenges, there's still room for adaptation, resilience, even moments of real beauty and meaning.
It's about embracing the mystery of the brain and realizing that there's still so much we don't understand about this incredible organ that shapes who we are.
Exactly. It's a call to approach neurology, and really all of science, with a sense of wonder, a sense of curiosity, recognizing that each individual brain is its own universe.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the technical side of neurology, but Sachs reminds us that it's ultimately about understanding the human experience.
I couldn't agree more. So I know this deep dive has been pretty heavy, so I want to leave you with one last thought. Think about this. If our brains can change so much, how fixed is our identity really? What does it even mean to have a self when the very thing that shapes that self, our brain, is always changing?
Wow, that's a really profound question. It makes me rethink everything we've talked about today. It's like Sachs is pushing us to go beyond just understanding the brain and to really grapple with the philosophical side of what it means to be human.
That's exactly it. He's not afraid to ask those big questions. What does it mean to be conscious? What's the nature of memory? How do our brains create our reality?
Yeah, it's amazing to think that even with such severe memory loss, Mr. Thompson could still find those moments of peace and connection, through something like a religious service. It really speaks to that idea that we're more than just our memories or our cognitive abilities.
It really does. And that's maybe the biggest takeaway from all of Dr. Sachs's work. It's a call for compassion, understanding, and really appreciating just how resilient the human spirit can be. It reminds us that even when facing loss and limitations, there can still be growth, adaptation, and even transcendence.
His work is just so hopeful. He doesn't shy away from the huge challenges that his patients are facing, but he always finds those glimmers of hope and humanity. It's really inspiring.
It is. And it reminds us that our sense of self, our identity, it's not this fixed, unchanging thing. It's a fluid process, always changing,
Hmm.
shaped by our experiences, our relationships, and yeah, even by the way our brains work.
That makes me think back to the question you asked earlier, about if our brains can change so much. How fixed is our identity, really? What does it even mean to have a self when the very thing that shapes that self, our brain, is always changing?
Right. It's a question that's fascinated people for centuries, philosophers, scientists, everyone. And I think Sachs gives us this unique perspective because he comes at it not just from a scientific angle, but from a really human one. He gets that the self isn't just a product of our brains, it's also about how we interact with the world and with each other.
Yeah, he really encourages us to think outside of those traditional boundaries of neurology and to consider, the philosophical implications of these conditions. He wasn't afraid to ask those big questions. What does it mean to be conscious? What is memory? How do our brains build the reality that we experience?
Exactly. He wasn't content with just diagnosing and treating. He wanted to understand what it was like to be his patients, to explore those deep mysteries of the human mind. And in doing that, he helped us see that even with neurological challenges, there can be beauty, resilience, and a profound sense of connection.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of Oliver Sacks. I feel like my brain has expanded and I've gained a whole new appreciation for the complexity and the wonder of this amazing organ that makes us who we are.
I'm so glad to hear that. Sachs' work has that effect on people. It opens up these new ways of seeing the world and ourselves.
If anyone out there is interested in exploring more, I definitely recommend checking out The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. It's one of those books that sticks with you long after you finish it, and it'll make you look at the world and yourself in a whole new light.
I totally agree. It's a must-read for anyone who's interested in the brain and what it means to be human, in the mysteries of consciousness.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the mind. And remember, like Dr. Sachs would say, keep those curious minds engaged. The world is full of wonders just waiting to be discovered, especially within the intricate landscapes of our own brains.
Beautifully said. Until next time, keep exploring.